So we have talked a lot about how to get more from different sectors of the economy, oil and non-oil sectors, essentially to make more money. And I still can't get that analogy from Mr. Laji out of my head. You know, the match between Mr. Macaroni and Anthony Joshua. Even though that's a match I would love to see for charity purpose, not for competitive purpose. But, you know, more importantly, in this conversation around the economy, you know, getting more revenue is the conversation about the management and utilization of these funds. Yes, we're not making as much as we ought to make, I mean, with the vast amount of resources we have, but how are we using the one we currently make, the revenue we currently generate and earn? And we're focusing this morning on sub-nationals and talking about states. Just recently, a certain report was released. That's a sub-national audit efficacy index report, where states across the federation were rated according to how effectively they managed that audit question. And this morning, we're taking a look at it. So if you have a state you're interested in, which I imagine you are, then you need to pay attention to this conversation. To do that with us this morning, we're joined in our studio by Mr. Olusegun Elemo, who is Executive Director, Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative, PLSI. They championed this particular report. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We also have joining us virtually Mr. Abdulsman Aliyu, who's Auditor General, Bauchi State. He's also Chairman, Body of Federal and State Auditors General. Joins us virtually this morning. Good morning and thank you for joining us as well. We'll come to you in a moment, Mr. Aliyu, but let's start with you, Mr. Elemo. So, Subnational Audit Efficacy Index 2021. I know this is a realm that you're always interested in, the Auditor General's report, but this is for subnationals. Let's start off with this very important question. Why do we need to know what's happening with subnationals in terms of the management and utilization of public funds?
Well, thank you for the question. Well, I would say that much attention has been focused on the center for a long time. Everybody is asking what the president is doing, what ministers are doing, what our federal appointees are doing, what senators are doing, and House of Rep members. And very little question, or none at all, is asked at subnational level at states and local government. Whereas when you look at the federal account allocation, committee sharing formula, I mean, you know that the federal government has just a little above 50% or thereabout, and the rest goes to subnational. So in that regard, we need to as well look at how governors and how, not just governors, I mean, I think basically how institutions of governance are operating at subnational level and whether they are delivering on their mandate to promoting accountability, fostering transparency, ensuring good governance, and accelerating development.
Who should be asking those questions?
I think citizens, really, because they are the governed, and citizens, stakeholders generally, whether the private sector or citizens generally, should be asking those questions from those who govern them. And those who govern them are not necessarily those who have been elected or appointed, but also those in civil service.
Well, the question then would be how, but we'll come to that. Mr. Usman, you also, as my colleague introduced you, are the chairman of Body of Federal and State Auditors General. One curious question. You heard my colleague say I'm like an Auditor General's champion on this program. So one question that I would love to find out from you is, why is it difficult for ministries, departments, and agencies to listen to Auditor Generals? I speak about that against the backdrop of the Auditor General's report that we only hear these are the people that are supposed to answer questions and they don't answer over and over the years.
Thank you for having me, Kenneth. You see, governance have to do with, we cannot succeed in governance without office of the Auditor General. And you see, we are in a sort of learning process. Ministries and departments are normally queried by the appropriate auditors if they fail to respond to our queries. So if they fail to clear, we send such observations to the House of Assembly, who will direct such observation to the committee in charge of public accounts. So there is a process, but you see, we have to galvanize the process. We have to strengthen the process. Section 125, subsection 6, and section 85, section 6 is clearly on the form. That is why each of the states establish audit law to strengthen the audit institution, so that the various stakeholders must be, especially the accounting officers, must be held accountable in the course of public spending. So we are on the process. Over 30 states in Nigeria have already established the law. We have discussed, I and my secretary have discussed with the World Bank how to see that the law is observed. They should help us ensuring that we have implemented these laws, not just establishing the laws, but how do we implement the law? If these laws are well implemented, Nigeria will be better, because the essence of government in democratic government is providing good to the people.
Well, Mr. Usman, you haven't really quite answered my question of why they do not listen. But perhaps you are also, from what you're saying now, trying to take action to ensure that there is some teeth from the office or offices of the Auditors General across the nation. So in terms of that, perhaps it's also to say that many people do not understand the role of the Auditor General, especially at the subnational level. What is it that people need to know so that they can offer the right kind of support to the Auditor General's office in their various states? Can you hear me, Mr. Usman? Okay, well, we'll get back to him, but that question needs to be, answered. Well, you are not an auditor, but at least you have been in this space. I also know that you are championing a law to stand alone, sort of, to give some level of autonomy to the Auditor General. How far with that, and how is that going to help this process?
Well, okay, so I think it's to say that we need to separate what's happening from the federal, with what's happening from states. We've been advocating for a federal audit law for many years now. The laws have been sent to different presidents, and they've refused to assent. And that goes to show the potency of audit instruments. Now, going back to the subnational, like what Mr. Aliyu said, is that we need to strengthen audit institutions at subnational, and it's very, very important, because that's the foremost accountability institution. And that is perhaps, not just perhaps, I think definitely, the only accountability institutions recognized in the Constitution. He mentioned Section 125 as it relates to subnational audits. And then, of course, Section 85 as it relates to federal audit. But if institutions of democratic institutions at subnational level don't function effectively, you can't even have an audit system that then demands or ensures accountability.
Consequently, before we go to those, consequently, the championing of this report,
absolutely.
Right? Okay, so tell us the modalities. Most certainly the states that are indicted are not going to find it funny. Well, indicted in quotes now. So what is the modalities, and why should we consider it something believable?
Well, let me first say that the objective of the report is not even in any way to embarrass states. I think it's more of trying to assist state governments, looking at where gaps are in terms of public finance management practices, and then help to strengthen those areas, fill those gaps, and then by extension, accelerate development. I think that's the primary objective of this report. But in looking at the methodology and the scoring criteria, is that to also mention that we published the Subnational Audit Efficacy Index 2020 on 10th May 2021, last year. And that was benchmarked against the 2019 financial year. And we looked at, I think, about just 2 indices. We looked at audit legal framework, but we did not even go in depth as this. And then we also looked at, whether states are publishing the required audit documents. Those were the 2 parameters that we assessed last time. And then many states performed very well. I mean, and then because we're just starting it, we needed to encourage states to participate in it. But for the 2021 index, we look at 6 scoring criteria.
For the 2020 financial year?
For the 2020 financial year now. Yeah, we looked at 6 scoring criteria. And then 6 of those, we looked at the audit legal framework. And that's also mentioned, touch on what Mr. Aliyu said, that many of the states have now passed their laws. And that was after we published the SAE Index 2020. So we looked at the audit legal framework. We looked at audit mandate. We looked at type of audit document produced and published for 2020 financial year. We looked at type of audit conducted in 2020, and then we looked at citizens' participation in the audit process, as well as role of public account committees. Those were the 6 scoring parameters that we used.
And I think the natural question is, what did you find? What was most instructive, remarkable for you? I see that part of the things you found is just, interestingly, right here, that only 11 out of 36 states assessed conducted either compliance or performance audit on public expenditure in 2020. 11 out of 36, that's
Absolutely.
less than half.
Absolutely. Only 11. And many people may not, see, this thing sounds a little bit technical sometimes when you say compliance audit, performance audit. What does that even mean? What compliance audit means is that the auditors are assessing government institutions, government agencies, whether their operations within that financial year have conformed to regulatory provisions and laws that set them up. There's no institution of government that just sprang up. There was a law, maybe an act of parliament, maybe a provision of the constitution that set it up. And whoever is running that institutions must run it in conformity with the laws that set it up. And that's the whole essence of compliance audit. So in carrying out activities of that institutions, you must comply with those laws. Only 11 states in Nigeria, carried out that assessment to ensure that institutions of government comply with the laws that set them up.
Just to break this down further, a lot of people are maybe listening to this for the first time. Yes, you know the Auditor General's report. I'm sure you have like a compendium of them. You know this well, but because I know that citizen participation is a big part of this year's study. Break this down further. So an institution of government, can you give an example? What is expected of that institution in terms of compliance audits? What does the law say? You might not be specific, but what does the law say they have to do? How do they flout that particular law?
So I would give you an instance from the federal. Say, for instance, the Niger Delta Development Commission. It's a statutory agency set up by an act of parliament. So in awarding contracts, for instance, there are financial regulations and procurement laws that you must observe. And when you don't observe those laws and ensure that the bidding process, the award process, and the execution process, and everything, maybe the evaluation and all of that, conforms with that law, then it's a red flag. There is high tendency that there will be corruption in between. There is high tendency that there will be loss of public funds.
Let me get this right. A law sets up an institution, an agency, whatever, and it's expected that whoever heads that agency or institution, or whoever is in the management body of that institution has an idea, at least, of what the law says.
Absolutely.
And I mean, they have, I don't want to say they have auditors, but they have people in charge of their finances who should know these things. Perhaps the person even has, you know, the right kind of, the educational qualification. So these are things they know, right? So you're saying that these same people that are meant to uphold the minimum standards of the law are the ones dropping the ball.
Absolutely.
By the way, I changed my mind. You can be specific. You can speak to specifics, either state or institution.
Well, I wouldn't want to touch on specifics. The reason is because the reports are out there. And anybody can pick it up. So in terms of specifics, yes, we can go in terms of in some certain areas, but not maybe in award of contract or things like that. But it's to say that they have accountants within those institutions. They have internal auditors that should ensure conformity to laws, whether financial regulations or procurement laws. But I think by and large is that when there is no penalty for bad behavior, then people continue in that
But
trend.
the laws stipulate punishment, I imagine.
Absolutely. But I think that's the whole essence of why the auditors need to do the work that they need to do, because ordinarily, you see, audit report itself should serve as raw material for anti-corruption agencies to be able to do their work more effectively, more efficiently. But when auditors are not even, for instance, I mean, how do you explain the fact that only 11 states conducted compliance and performance audits on public projects and government programs in 2020? It is to say that, for instance, performance audit, what does it do? It assesses the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the economy of public spending on government programs and projects. So, for instance, when a road is constructed in your community and then it breaks down 3 months after, I think we should blame the auditor.
Interestingly, Mr. Aliyu is back online, but just quickly for you. So what can that imply if, compliance audit, performance audit is not adhered to? Does that mean something untoward is happening behind the scenes?
It means that something untoward can happen and will eventually happen.
Okay. Let me take this to Mr. Aliyu. It's good to have you back, Mr. Aliyu. I would first ask you to respond to the question my colleague raised earlier about why it is, hard to get the government to maybe listen to Auditors General. And then he talked about the role of Auditors General. So I'm going to pack everything together, plus the question I was asking our guests in the studio as to, so the possibilities, when these laws are flouted, what does that mean? Does that mean necessarily corruption is going on? So I don't know how you can pack those together and respond. Mr. Aliyu, can you hear me? We seem to be. Can you hear me?
Okay. Please, can I have you again?
Okay. Let me just start from the conversation we're into now. Perhaps we'll get you to respond to the earlier ones. But so we're talking about compliance and performance audit. And from that report, it says 11 out of 36 states actually conducted, compliance and performance audit. So that leaves us with, 25 states that are clearly flouting that. And you oversee, as it were, the Auditors General across the state. So what does that imply? Why is it hard for states to actually comply with what the law that actually sets up those agencies says?
Actually, the audit as an institution is trying its best. The only issue is the high-handedness of some chief executive. Maybe when they feel some of them are close to the powers that be, they try to subvert the institution. But for performance audit, is highly capital intensive and it needs a lot of capacity. It takes time. You take ministry by ministry to conduct performance audit. It is not an audit that you are going to take holistically for the whole state. you say you are going to perform performance audit, you have to take some particular areas, especially risk areas, and conduct performance audit on them. So it is not going to be holistic. So that is why it is difficult to perform performance audit, because you want to ascertain the economy, the efficiency and effectiveness of the projects, and most importantly, the result that that expenditure has brought. For example, if your village have, for instance, a cholera, and what you need is to have pipe-borne water. You need to have pipe-borne water. And if they say pipe-borne water has been dug, the most important thing is that has the cholera stopped? Has it been reduced? That is the meaning of effectiveness. That is what the spending has affected the people. So the issue of accountability and auditing has become very, very important, because it is now almost everybody's business. Even man on the street should be concerned with what is spent on his budget.
Just a quick one. Just a quick one, Mr. Usman. What are the challenges? What are the challenges that auditors general have with their chief executives?
Thank you. No, the challenges most auditors general have is almost threefold. One is financial autonomy, because the essence of the law is to give the auditor general financial autonomy to perform his duty in line with the law and constitution. But most of the auditor general will be looking for even 500,000 in their office, they cannot get. So it is very difficult for you to work without finance. That is why the law is established. The second is the issue of administrative autonomy. Administrative autonomy means that you have to appoint, promote, and discipline your people in line with your tests. But you find out that some staff are sent to audit because they are not needed elsewhere. So they will just move to audit institution because some institutions don't need them. So you see, you need a best person, one of the best and competent person in the audit to be able to carry out the job. So these are some of the problems the audit institution is facing. That is the regulatory problem, which border on financial, administrative, and operational autonomy. So if we are able to get all this one, I believe that each auditor general office will function as expected in the Constitution.
Okay, let me come to you, Mr. Elemo. Let's speak to the document directly now. The SAE ranking, you call it subnational audit efficacy, ranking for 2021. This is what you will find from the bottom up now. You'll find that the 39th position, that's what you have right there. The 36th position, at 39%, forgive me. You have Benue State, and then you have Lagos. One would have thought, Lagos wouldn't come that low. What are some of the findings that shocked you?
It's one of the things we discovered, really. After we did the last assessment, like I said, we tried, it was sort of spoon-feeding states, just to say, okay, let's lower the standard. But we had even mentioned at that time that we're going to expand our methodology.
Yeah, you're coming for war next time.
No, certainly, we told them. And to say again that this whole exercise, we interacted with all auditors general in all the 36 states, all accountant generals, all public account committees chairman in all the 36 states, and 3 civil society each in each state of the federation. So there is not one auditor general today or accountant general or chairman of public account committee in any state of the federation that can say boldly that we did not interact or would not engage in this process. Now, one of the things we saw is that, for instance, Lagos State, I don't know if any Lagosian has seen the audit law for Lagos State, but it's not in public domain. I understand that the governor signed the law in 2019, but why is it not out there? Why aren't citizens able to access that law? You see, because if you don't have access to the law and the provisions of the law, you don't have the instrument to hold public officials accountable. Again, is that Lagos State, the audit report for Lagos State is not in public domain. You see, people make a mistake.
And what is the implication of that?
The implication is that citizens cannot ask questions. And I will tell you, see, people make mistake between the audited financial statement and audit reports. These are two separate documents produced by the same institution, which is the institution, the audit institution, but they contain two distinct content.
How are they distinct?
The audited financial statements are just quantitative data. They are numeric. So you have the figures, how much was the budget, how much was this, how much was spent, and all of that. Those are the things you get there in the audited financial statement. And you don't even get them in details. But in the audit report, you have notes, you have report of the auditors against the spending. And whether those spendings, like I said, have complied with relevant provisions of the law. And who has flouted what, and whether funds have not been accounted for, and what institution needs to do what in recovering funds from those that have not accounted for funds.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Ricardo, we're running out of time, but we need to come up with at least some closure, so to speak. It is expected that maybe some states may want to react to some of the issues that we have raised, so we'll be waiting for that. But in terms of moving forward and helping the process to be better, what are some of the recommendations that you would need? Because ultimately, it is about development. We began this program today talking about improving the process. And you also, referenced the fact that we most of the time centralize the conversations.
Absolutely.
Decentralize it to the 36 states and the FCT now. What are some of the recommendations that you think are crucial if we are going to manage our resources well and, as Kayode said, maximize value for money?
One, I think governors now, and we've engaged with the governors forum. And we're engaging, and we'll continue to engage. Like I said, this is not a vindictive report. It is not, to embarrass anybody. It's to work together and see how we can, strengthen institutions of government. But one of the things we have recommended is that governors need to muster the political will to ensure that audit offices at subnational level have financial autonomy. And you heard when Mr. Ali mentioned that. That's one of the challenges that we have seen and we saw, in the course of this research. And indeed, to say that we did not even assess states against operationalization of financial autonomy yet, but for the SA Index 2022, we're certainly going to assess them against that.
So they have like a year to implement that. Exactly.
So they need to, the governor needs to ensure that financial autonomy kicks in, so that the Auditor General gets the funding from the first line charge, directly from the, Consolidated Revenue Fund. Another thing, like Mr. Ali mentioned, is administrative autonomy, and we measure that. We looked at that, the staffing structure of the Office of the Auditor General. The Auditor General needs to be able to independently hire, fire, and dismiss its staff, discipline it. But you discover that many states have not constituted, audit service commission. After the law have been passed, many states passed their laws between June and December 2021. So you wonder why after 8-9 months, 10 months, they've not started implementing the laws.
What's quite interesting, we're totally out of time very soon, is the fact that this is for financial year 2020, the year of COVID-19.
Absolutely.
Which is the year that we had a lot of
disruptions
and questions are still being asked about how some funds are being spent. But something quite instructive is citizen participation. Well, there's been a talk about having a public accounts committee in the state assemblies actually taking this on, because he says that if they fail to look at the report, they will send it over to the public accounts committee, who can then champion this. The state assemblies represent the people. So looks like they're complicit, or at least they are complicit in all of this.
Absolutely.
So can the people push from there?
No, certainly they can. They elected them. It should be able to do that. It should be able to do that. Now we're going to continue to engage the people to do that. And many states now are beginning to respond. I think AKT sent us, a note that they are now, they've started, looking at, report of the Attorney General for 2020 or maybe for 2021, I think. And then they've invited civil society to come and witness what's happening and engage. But one thing we also saw is that 31 out of 36, public accounts committees in all the 36 states are either less effective or not effective at all.
31.
31.
That's literally all of them.
That's literally all of them. So it goes to show again the quality of legislators we have at subnational level.
In that regard, just a very, very quick one. What questions should the voter be asking before employing the next set of legislators into their state House of Assembly?
Well, I think the indicator will be that whether reports of the Attorney General in public domain, whether the State Assembly have reviewed it, and whether the State Assembly have passed any resolution on the report of the Attorney General, what those resolutions are.
My apologies. How important is it for a legislator to understand these processes before being employed by the people?
Well, not necessarily that they must understand it. I think that we had an issue, a discussion around capacity gaps and whether we can strengthen, rather than focusing on strengthening capacity of legislators, and whether we can strengthen the technical assistance that legislators come to rely on once they come into office. I think if we're able to strengthen that technical support that the legislator come to rely on, then they can then help the legislator to do their work. Because, you cannot, once they meet the requirement that INEC puts out, the qualification, they may not necessarily have the accounting background. But it is that when you come into public accounts, it is public accounts, and you must have accounting, knowledge, sort of. But you can also rely on your technical support to be able to do that work efficiently. But I think it is the commitment, it is the diligence, it is the commitment on the part of legislators to actually do the work, not necessarily whether they have, background knowledge on the subject.
I see Bauchi ranked first, followed by Osun.
Osun also ranked first. Yeah.
And Ekiti, Yobe, Kaduna, Borno, Plateau, Imo, Kebbi, and on and on. I do hope, really, that this conversation has opened up the bigger conversation for the executive, the legislature, and more importantly, the people. I want to ask you what people can do moving on from this conversation, but as you always say, don't answer that. But it's been a very interesting conversation, really. I'd like to thank you so much, Mr. Olusegun Elemo, who is the Executive Director, Paradigm Leadership Support Initiative. I see that report is over 100 pages.
About 158, actually.
I have a lot of work to do on that one. I would also like to thank Mr. Abdul Usman, who is Auditor General, Bauchi State, and the Chairman Body of Federal and State Auditors General. Thank you so much as well for your time on the program this morning.